Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another inner hour tonight. I appreciate it. Hope you're having a good weekend so far and ready to start your week shortly. Uh, so I just invite you to take a moment. I usually light a candle here on my end to give myself just a moment to kind of collect my attention and be focused on being present here in spirit and not distracted by something else that's happening somewhere else or some other time. There's my little candle. So tonight we're starting a new series. Uh, we'll see how long this one goes. Uh, we had mentioned toward the end of last time, at the end of the last series, the subject of fear came up, and I was saying sometime we should do a series on fear, although probably no one would like it. So we kind of are and we kind of aren't. So I thought about it and have talked to some people about it, and so we're doing a series on love and fear. So um, I will kind of introduce that for a few minutes tonight, sort of a general overview of some things I hope we touch on in this. And yeah, by the way, so any of you who have cameras are welcome to turn the cameras on and leave them on the whole time if you like. The only thing we ask you is to keep your microphone muted until you're actually talking because of the background noise and things like that that comes through. But cameras can be on anytime. It's lovely to see everybody. So I like that personally. Um, so the love and fear idea is something obviously that's really prevalent in spiritual writings. It's also really prevalent in psychological writings because if you think about it, regardless of our belief system, our particular faith, or not having a particular faith, the majority of your life, if you look back on your life from childhood on, from your time you can remember till now, um, basically two things that were consistently present in your life, not always in the same degree, is love and fear. Love is always a component of your life, whether it's present, hopefully, or whether it's absent in your longing for it. Love is a present, ever-present kind of feature of human life. And sadly, so is fear. From the time babies come in, they have fears, various ones. Not as many as we have now, but they have a few that seem to be innate fears. And um, and throughout the course of our life, that's what we deal with. Probably, if you are talking in kind of generic or energetic terms, as opposed to people, the two things that have had most impact on you for your entire life have been love and or fear. So I thought it'd be nice to talk about those. And the what I am sort of intending, and we'll see if it goes this direction, is that for each one of those, I have a few different aspects that I hope we can get to and cover. So and they're in this order if I can if it happens in the way I'm sort of imagining it. Um, on both of those, the first thing I'd like to talk about is the origin. I'm a big origins guy. If you're trying to figure out what a particular teaching means, it helps to go back to the original as close as you can, at least, to get a sense of what it originally was and whoever it was that taught that, whether it's Buddha or Jesus, whoever, get back as close to that time period and that when it was brought forth. You'll have a much more accurate picture than centuries or thousands of years later. Um, so I want to talk about the origins of fear and love. The second thing is I'd like to talk about the physiology of those things. What happens to them what happens to them as the body experiences those things. The third thing is the effects on us, the effects love has on us, the effect fear has on us, um, not just at a biological level, but at an emotional, mental, level, so on. The next thing is uh, the, I guess I would call it kind of allowing or resisting. because we can do both with fear and love. You'd think we'd always just allow love, but we don't. We resist that too. So, um, what what changes in our experience of love or fear when we primarily are allowing versus when we're primarily resisting? Or you might put it when we're trying to control, or we're not trying to do that. So those are the kind of aspects that I hope we get to of each of these things. And then the last one is, so why is it set up like this? Why are those the primary things in a human life experience? And what's the point? What's the point of, of experiencing those? Is there a point, and what is it? So that's what I would kind of like to focus on. So I'm going to start with fear tonight, and we may go back and forth between fear and love, probably as people contribute. That will happen. Um, but in general, I want to kind of focus on fear because that's the most troublesome for us, and it's for most of us, it's the most it's present a lot in some form or other, and we struggle with it. So I kind of like to deal with that first, and we'll see if we do a separate section on love or if it kind of all intersperses. I'm not sure how that will unfold. So I want to say a few things about the origins of fear tonight that I know, which, and you may know things probably that I don't, and perhaps I know a few that you don't, but I want to share a little bit about, from my orientation at least, the origins of fear, and then open it up to everybody and whatever you would like to contribute along those lines, whether it's your insights or your experience or questions. And obviously, your questions don't have to be answered by me. You all know that by now. Anybody's welcome to respond to anybody's question. So, as far as the origins of fear, um, in the world faith traditions that I've studied, um, they all talk about that. They all have a story. Whether you think of it as a story or think of it as a mythology or think of it as this is literally how it happened, most of the major world religions have stories that address, so where did fear come from? When did that start? How did it start? And they're all slightly different, but the fact that they all address it, again, when I say all, I mean the ones I've studied, and I've studied quite a few of the major ones. Uh, it's considered important enough to try to understand it, so it's prevalent in the writings of many traditions. So I'm gonna talk about that most traditions have two components. They have a component of fear starting in us. Where did fear start in us? And secondarily, um, a non-human source of fear, or a cosmic source of fear, or an energetic source of fear, or an angelic source of fear, however we want to think about these aspects. So typically, the in all these traditions, as we've talked about in another series before, there's a light and dark side, or a good and evil side, or a polarity to it, and the fear is associated with that dark side, not with the light side. In the Bible, in a number of places, for example, it says in God there's no fear. It says things in the New Testament like perfect love casts out fear. Um, there are lots of writings about that in the Bible, lots of writings about it in the Hindu sacred scriptures, in the Buddhist scriptures, and Islam, and so on. Uh, but basically, they refer to that origin of fear as being from the dark side, or from the evil, or from the evil one, or sometimes it's personified, and you have beings like Satan, or Kal, or Mara in Buddhism, or Ahriman in Zoroastrianism. These uh, these various, and I've forgotten them. In the Norse mythology, there are good and bad ones too, and so in the Greek and Roman, it's pretty prevalent. And they all have their various names for this. But I'm just going to talk just a couple more moments about the Jewish Christian story of these origins. And because the Jewish and Christian both share the same story. And that story occurs in Genesis, which is in both Christian and Jewish Bibles. And it's the story of the Garden of Eden, which we find in the third chapter, starting in the third chapter of Genesis. And an oversimplification is that at one point, after a male and female human being had been created, they were put in this garden, Gan Eden, and their experience in the garden was paradisical. It was everything that they needed for sustenance of their life was provided, whether it's food, water, whatever it was, even companionship with one another. Um, all of that was provided without their effort. They didn't have to plant crops for crops to grow and be harvested. They just grew. They didn't have to, they didn't have disease. They didn't know death. They could communicate with one another. They could see and hear and communicate directly with God. This is not me saying this again. This is the story. I'm just paraphrasing the story. But they walk and talk with God every day in the garden. Um, so there's not this sense of who's God, is there a God, how do I communicate with God, how does God communicate? There wasn't that. There wasn't that sense of separation or distance or confusion. And basically everything was, hunky-dory in the garden. They even could, all creatures in the garden, not only the man and woman, but all creatures in the garden were vegetarian. There were no creatures in nature that ate each other like we do with our insects and animal population and sometimes the human population too. Uh, that didn't happen in this story as it's presented. So basically, it's idyllic. Here's everything you need for a wonderful, happy life, and everything is great in the garden. And and then where things go awry, there's an external force, and then there's an internal thing that happens, as I mentioned a moment ago, and this is true in most stories of most religions. So in this version, the external thing that happens is there's a serpent. I know it's sometimes called a snake, but really a nachash is probably more accurately translated as serpent. And there's a serpent in the garden, and and that serpent interacts with Eve and then convinces her to disobey God's instructions. There are two trees that are not fully described in this story in the garden. It's more described in Kabbalistic literature and the Book of Adam and Eve, which is a non-biblical book, very old, but a non-biblical book. It's described in much more detail there. But these two trees, the tree of life, which mankind was allowed to partake of, and Adam and Eve, I'll say at that point, and the tree of not tree of good and evil, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is an important distinction, because good and evil existed before mankind. And in the story of the garden, the evil side represented by the serpent, which was already there. Adam and Eve did not create the serpent, did not create evil. God already did that. Even elsewhere in the Bible, as hard as it may be to believe, Isaiah, for example, it says, I create light and darkness, good and evil. God has supposedly said that in the Bible. So that's already there. But the existence of good and evil, so they're already in the garden and the serpent's already there. So there's already this kind of good and evil dynamic, and it doesn't cause them any problem at all. None. There's a reason evil exists, and it doesn't cause us any problems. But once they interact with it, in this case, the woman, who then convinces Adam to do what the serpent has told them and disobey God's instructions, the once they interact with that and they do what the serpent suggests, which is take the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, knowing what that is, and they take it into themselves, symbolically representing it becomes part of their consciousness now. So now they know it. It existed before, but they weren't interacting with it. It wasn't part of their life, and they didn't know about it. And it was not causing them a problem. So now they've taken it into their consciousness, and everything at that point changes. Um, at that point, we begin to see demonstrations of polarity and for and against, and good and evil demonstrated in their relationship with animals, in their relationship with God, in and spreading into the world. We see then from then on through the rest of the Bible a polarized world and a polarized human experience. Other traditions, as I said, have other stories, but essentially the same kind of components. There's some external thing, mankind gets involved in it, and now their whole experience is a polarized consciousness. Even their bodies are polarized, two eyes, two ears, so on, two limbs, two, all these different polarities we have, even in our body. So there's this external source in this story that we get involved in that we were warned not to get involved in, but, but we did it anyway. Um, and then secondarily, there's the human thing of when fear actually begins to get a hold of them. So the very first demonstration of fear in the Jewish Christian Bible story is after this incident with the serpent, and they partake of these things, and the way they look at everything changes. When that happens, and God is coming through, walking through the garden. Again, you can take this literally if you like, or you can take this all as allegory and symbolism, of course. But but the idea was they walked and talked with God in the garden daily. Now here's coming God. And so they would normally go up and walk and talk with God. And they don't. What happens is when they hear God coming before they see God coming, when they hear God approaching, they get afraid. And that's the first instance of fear in the Bible. They had not been afraid before. So now they're afraid. And why are they afraid? And what are they afraid of? And it explains this in the story. So the reason they're afraid is because they're ashamed. They do not want to be seen in their shame. So then they do the next thing, which is they hide. So they experience fear because they feel ashamed of themselves and they don't want to be exposed or seen. So they hide. And as if so like they're hiding from God, right? Like God has no clue where they are. Not likely, but anyway, that's the story. That's what happens. They hide, and then God finds them, of course, and calls them out. And it's like, why are you hiding? Again, God doesn't know why they're hiding. The why are you hiding is not to inform God. It is to create self-awareness in them. What's going on in you that's triggering this behavior? And that's an important part of the story is a teaching that we need to spend some time in self-examination, looking at internally, what is it that's motivating us to do these various behaviors we have, especially ones that are destructive to ourselves or to other people. Where's that coming from? What's motivating that? So that's what's happening in this story. But basically that psychology still occurs. And I'm going to kind of speed this up and way oversimplified and the super Reader's Digest version of it. For those of you old enough to remember Reader's Digest, the psychologically, when we are true to ourself, when we're true to our own nature, and you can describe that in many ways, true to your soul, true to the divine image in you, true to your who you want to be, true to yourself, true to your own nature, all these different things. When you're in harmony with that, when you're true to that, you're not ashamed of what you've done in yourself. When you go against what you know, you do not act on what you know. You go against what you know to be right. And I'm not talking about socially instilled right and wrong conventional values. That's another thing altogether. But inwardly, you have a sense of this is the right thing to do, or this is really not the right thing to do. And then you do the wrong thing anyway, not by somebody else's standards, but by yours. And you violate that. You violate what you know to be true. You say things that you know aren't true. You do things that you know aren't right. When you do that, even if nobody else knows you're violating those, you don't feel good about yourself anymore. You feel ashamed of yourself. And at that point, you believe that if other people knew that thing you did or said, that it might have been so bad that they're not going to love you anymore and they're going to reject you and outcast you. So you now have to be careful. Now you have to live in fear. And like Adam and Eve, you have to live in hiding. You have to hide what you've done because it will be totally unacceptable should anyone else come to know it. So you do not want someone else to know it. And so you hide that part of you. And then we come into all the things that in Greek tragedy was called persona, and in psychological terms that change as the years go on. But the idea is we begin to hide, we create masks or personas or personalities. We project images of ourselves that will try to convince other people we're like this image we're projecting, but we don't expose kind of our inner soft belly, those wounded, frightened parts of ourselves. We try to keep that hidden because we think it's a vulnerability we can't afford to expose. So that kind of psychology that is demonstrated in the Adam and Eve story is present in human consciousness still. But that was the in the Jewish Christian version, that was the original story that addressed some of those things. And and the so that's sort of where that starts. And then everything changes in their relationship with the world and in their relationship with God. And then eventually they're exiled from the garden. And so one of the things that means, although the text does not say it this way, is that the consciousness they experienced, the quality of life, the quality of relationship they had with the divine that they experienced in the garden, they no longer have. They don't experience that kind of relationship, that kind of intimacy or closeness, that kind of knowing of God and sharing with God. They feel distanced. They feel put out, exiled, abandoned, not good enough, separated, judged, all those things that we don't like feeling that we say, oh, well, I don't want to feel like that. Well, neither did they, but they did feel like that. So again, there's so much of what human life is now and what we all experience that is um, kind of has its roots in that story, or you can see its roots in that story as an attempt to explain how some of that came to be. So I'm going to pause there because Nechama and Shuli have something to share. Go ahead.
It's mommy. I just, I've thought about this story a lot. So that's part of this. And in addition to everything you're saying, another thing that came up for me is that once we had tasted of the fruit, knew about the tree of, knew about life and death,
Yes.
that one of the things that happened is until then, they were unaware of death.
Right. Right.
And the sense of mortality can be terrifying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
where some of that fear came from,
Absolutely.
and built some of the other things that, and encouraged or fed some of those other things you were talking about as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There are non-biblical stories, as you probably know, in the Jewish tradition about um, Adam and Eve being afraid of dying and about night when night first fell. And they thought everything's dark and we can't see anything. What is this, the end of everything? What is this? So yeah, that's that mortality. And still today, we have lots of ways of coping with that. But even if we
It's
convince ourselves that we're not afraid of our own mortality, our bodies certainly are. Our bodies fight very hard to stay alive because they don't want to die. So
Mhm.
there's and we have a built-in fear mechanism, that is designed to kind of save the body from the saber-toothed tigers and the dinosaur, whatever, all the things out there to eat us and our life. So that's a great addition. Thank you. I appreciate that.
People, in my experience, many people have that fear, but suppress it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there are so many other things we can point to instead that
Yeah,
we're afraid of, whatever, where they channel it and hide from that fear of death.
that's for sure. That's
And
for sure.
so I guess Adam and Eve did a little bit of that too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Thank
for those of you who've worked with hospice people or just been with someone as they died, maybe not in a hospice setting, um, it's interesting to watch, and it varies person to person, but it's interesting to watch some people go through a metamorphosis of how they feel about dying as they get closer and closer to dying. And sometimes there is a real sense of acceptance and peace that comes with that. And sometimes there's a fight like right up until the end. It varies quite a bit, but it's interesting to see how some people really how they thought they would feel about dying actually changes as they actually approach that moment. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
you.
Anybody else? Anybody else have insights, comments, questions up to this point? And it doesn't have to be about the Garden of Eden story. Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Anna.
I have a question about why this was written that Eve picked the apple.
Hmm.
Does that have something to do with men writing the Old Testament?
Um,
Because isn't it really saying that man, however you want to do it? So I was just struck by that question when we started talking about it, because
hmm,
that has unleashed on
mhm. Yeah,
numbers of issues with women.
yeah, yeah, for sure. The Yeah, well, that's a something that's discussed a lot in various spiritual circles, of course. Um, Men, it's very convenient for men because it's all the women's fault. So I personally like that. I mean, I think that's lovely, but not really, of course. But the and the other thing is that even in the question that you just asked, it's interesting because there's an assumption of we need to put blame somewhere. There's an assumption we need to blame somebody for this, as opposed to it just happened and unfolded that way. Somebody's, it's your fault. It's Eve's fault. Well, no, it's Adam's fault because if he'd been with her instead of playing poker that night, he wouldn't have had her, talking to the serpent and everything would have been okay. So it's his fault for being a negligent husband. Um, and no matter how you cut it, they both ate it. So, Adam has the responsibility for his own choices, no matter what Eve told him. So men can't get off the hook that way. Is there, as far as we know, was most of the Bible written by men? Absolutely. And was there a different view of women throughout most of biblical history? Yeah, than we have now, for example. Yes, absolutely. There were times where women were literally considered property. There were times when they weren't considered property, but they had very, very few rights, much like Sharia law, Islam states now. A lot they couldn't study, they couldn't get educated, they had to keep, there are lots of things they couldn't do that was prescribed for them by the men of their culture who were in power. So that's certainly a realistic component. Um, I actually asked that question, Anna, one time to many, many, many years ago. I just thought of it to a friend of mine who is traditional, in a traditional Christian viewpoint, and a literal one. He was a fundamentalist Christian. And I said, so why do you think it was written that Eve was the one that first, interacted with the serpent and ate of the fruit? And he said, because that's what happened. So I mean, that's another way to look at the story is somebody told it because that's the story that they were told that's how it happened. But yeah, that's another thing is that in the original, if we go back to Genesis 2, when and go through Genesis 3, the I later on in the New Testament, particularly in the writings of Paul, there's a lot about women being subservient to men. There's some things that counter that too, but there's a lot about that in Paul's writings. And in the in the Genesis story, woman was created out of man. They're created from the same substance, the same essence. And she wasn't created from his feet. where she was beneath him, or from the top of his head where she was above him. She was created from his side. So she was co-equal with him. And that's many rabbis have written about that idea that there was an equality between the sexes at that point, and in their relationship there was an equality. There's also another very complicating story, which I will avoid tonight, but if you want to look into it on your own, um, the early stories of the Garden of Eden that did not make it into the Bible, but is in other Jewish literature, contain another woman prior to Eve, whose name was Lilith. And that's a whole other story and a whole other dynamic, but it's a very interesting one. So, if anybody wants to look up that, you can check into her. But anyway, Anna, go ahead. Did I address any of that, or is there more, or did you want to say?
Yes, actually, what I meant, I didn't mean to blame man or woman. I guess there was no verbiage or way to express that there was a balance, that you couldn't say
Hmm.
mankind.
Hmm.
So I just think that if this could have come from what I think is a more enlightened place, is somehow presenting the story that it was a balance of male or female, or it was whatever you want to make that word.
Mm-hmm.
That it wasn't just a man and it wasn't just a woman, it wasn't gender related.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's what I was kind of looking at, is why was it presented where it wasn't a whole?
Yeah.
Why did we already start
Right.
talking about man and woman and
Right.
differences
Yeah. Good question.
from the
Good question.
very beginning?
Yeah, very early on. And there are many stories in the Bible where they're very pro women and women are the heroes as well. But this isn't one of them. But yeah, that's a good point about the right off the bat. There's this distinction, and we're back to that polarity again. Thank you, though. That's great. I appreciate it. Nahama or Shuli or both. Hi, Shuli.
Hi, Uncle Stephen. It's me this time. Of course, as always, Auntie needs her weather update.
Yes.
We have 2 mornings of cold and then 70s to 80s. So Auntie, even though she's not here, so she doesn't have to worry about it just yet.
Not yet. It was 32 here today, so we're not quite to where you are yet.
Love you too, Auntie. Okay. So, when you were talking about fear, of course, I've brought this up before, made me think of second season of The Good Place when they're teaching Ted Danson about fear.
Oh yeah, and he goes into the yeah.
Funny. So it made me think of that whole episode of him trying, because of his character, he's not supposed to know any of that.
Exactly. For those of you who don't know, and I don't know if there's any of you who don't, but just in case anybody doesn't, there's a series that Michael Schur put together. It's only 4 seasons long. It's, in my opinion, way too short, but it's an extraordinary series called The Good Place. It stars Ted Danson, Kristen Bell, and other, actually some fairly new actors at that point, but phenomenal metaphysical and spiritual allegories in that story all over the place, and you can extrapolate ones that aren't even there based on ones that are there. And it's funny. It's really a clever, well done, thoroughly enjoyable show that's not offensive in any way to me or anybody I've talked to. If you haven't seen it, it streams on many places, plus you can buy the DVDs. Yeah, go ahead.
To us,
You and Auntie during
and we
lockdown.
couldn't stop.
We had to get our own copy and see it entirely, and we did it binged in a few days.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome. It's
Yes.
really worth a watch if you haven't done it. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to let people know in case they didn't know about it.
Yeah. So no, it was just the whole thing. Well, it was more not on fear, but on death, because
Right.
the character doesn't know death, and then he has to think about it, and then
Mhm.
having a basic midlife crisis because of it. And then the whole thing is like, well, yeah, we have free will. We know. We
Yeah,
know we're going to die.
yeah.
And it's just like, it's part of life. So it's just, so it brought up that again. So sorry to repeat, but
No,
it's
that's
what came.
great. I'm glad you brought it up. And it's and his acting in that is just brilliant, I think. Just brilliant.
Mhm.
So, and
Oh,
funny. Yeah. Thank you both.
that's all. Sure.
Thank you, dear. James, go ahead.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
I have an odd, unformed thought, but kind of brought me back to the 1900s when I was at Indiana University for my political science degree. I kind of concentrated in political theory, and I remember reading the works of an anarchist named Mikhail Bakunin.
Hmm.
So for those who don't know, anarchists were the stage before Lenin, the
Right.
anarcho
Right.
socialist or whatever they called it.
Hmm.
Mikhail Bakunin said a very interesting thing about Satan, and he called him the very first revolutionary,
Yeah.
which I thought was very odd. And the way I'm kind of, it got me started thinking about our conversation tonight, thinking about were Adam and Eve before, I don't get it. And I agree with Anna. It's odd that Eve took the apple. Um, but for me, it's like before we took the apple and knew of the knowledge of the tree of life and everything,
Mhm.
were we, and this is a very modern concept, quote unquote, free,
Ah, right. Right.
and so for me is that maybe that was a step in human evolution.
Hmm.
I don't know. Like I said, it's an unformed thought, and I just started thinking about it. But for me, it almost seems like we need that fear of death in order to do certain things in our life.
Hmm.
And some would say we need to overcome it. Some would say we need to deal with it or whatever. I would hazard a guess and say most people say, well, you need to deal with your fear
Hmm.
in one way or another.
Hmm.
But for me, does it make us better people if we experience fear then rather than if we don't? Because just as you said at the beginning, all of us, whatever years ago were in the fields, and the people who were afraid didn't get eaten by the saber-tooth tigers, while the people who did or who weren't afraid tended to get eaten by the saber-tooth tigers.
Exactly.
um, and I just kind of thought of that. It's just, is that a step of evolution, or is that quote unquote makes us free, or whatever that would
Mm.
possibly be?
Yeah. That's a lovely um, line of inquiry. There actually are rabbinical commentaries on that very theme that what kind of steps one step back before that is um, if God certainly knew if he said, don't touch this tree, they were going to go touch the tree. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a setup in that way, and
Mhm.
that it was intended for them to experience all that. And then that kind of leads into what you were just saying, because there's an opportunity for moral and character development in the face of that kind of polarity and adversity. And we learn a lot of things from dealing with it. And so there was kind of like being kicked out of the nest, so to speak, and
Mhm.
learning that we can fly. So but that's a really well for an unformed thought. You expressed it really well.
Mm. Thank you. I try.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Somebody else? Oh, hi, Randy. I see Randy just joined us. So the in a lot of philosophical writings, non-religious philosophical writings like Socrates and Plato and many, many, many others, they're just sort of the classics. Um, there's this idea of duality or polarity is discussed at length, and they all have different ideas about it. One of the prevailing themes of many philosophy writings is that you can't know good without evil, you can't know light without dark, you can't, that you have to have this contrasting experience to really get it, and that's part of the nature of things, or the why things are structured that way. But back to the fear component, the so I guess let's just shift, since nobody has anything else right at the moment. Let's just shift a little bit into wherever fear originated, however it originates in back to us again. So how it originates in us as a species is one thing. How it originates in you and in me personally is another thing. Again, lots of studies have been done, psychological studies on babies, newborns, and what kind of fears they do or don't exhibit. And there aren't a lot of them. There are some, but there aren't a lot of them. Fear of falling, interestingly enough, is one of them that's prevalent. But they don't have a lot of other ones. But by the time you're our age, you have more fears than you could. If you made a list of everything you've ever been afraid of or worried about, it would be a long list for most of us. So we have a lot of fears as we grow. And one of the questions about origins in us is, it seems to me, maybe some of you might want to talk about this. It seems to me that we have fears based on our experiences. Something happens. We put our hand on the hot stove, we get burnt. That hurts. We're afraid of hot stoves. We go to a doctor, we're really little. They poke needles in us and do things that hurt us and frighten us, and we don't want to go to the doctor anymore because we're traumatized. We have some kind of medical test and it's awful and invasive and painful, and things that medical tests sometimes are, or medical procedures, surgeries and whatnot. And some are quite awful, really, even in modern medicine. And so we get traumatized about that. And now we have a fear around it where we didn't it before. So some of our fears that are part of us now arose in us in response to life experiences we had. And in psychological fears as well. I fall in love with somebody. I think this is a forever relationship. I'm really thrilled with it. I'm really wonderful. And then either they betray me, or they decide they want someone else, or things just fall apart and we split up for whatever reason, but it ends. And I'm really hurt by the fact that it ended. And now I have a fear of falling in love and trusting someone again because I've been hurt. So, but it's the same kind of thing, but now it's psychological. It's not a physical hurt, it's a psychological hurt. So I have these fears based on my life experiences. And then the other input of fear is that we have many fears that are not based on what we've actually gone through. They're based on what people have taught us to be afraid of. People teach us to be afraid of blacks, or they teach us to be afraid of the Jews, or they teach us to be afraid of God, or they teach us to be afraid of doctors, or they teach us to be afraid of, or whatever it is. They teach us to be afraid of a certain cultural, social, political party, and to trust other ones. So there's a lot of cultural fear conditioning that is not based on reality or experience of our own. It's based on what people are trying to put into us. And I'll give you just one example. First of all, the Christian church has done, traditional Christian churches throughout history have done both wonderful and awful things, as have all human beings and all human institutions. But one of the bad things that they did was start using fear to get people to turn to God. If you don't do what we tell you and you don't believe the way we tell you to believe, you're going to suffer in hell forever. Well, fear tactic to get something from us. Well, that happens all the time now. Our various medias, our advertisers, our social medias, our governmental medias, our news medias use that a lot. Get afraid and then you'll do what we would tell you to do. So there's fear that arises within us in response to actual real life things that happened to us that were very unpleasant or painful, physically or some other way. And then there's the fears that have been kind of impressed on us by our cultural, social conditioning that aren't real and that actually to protect our own psyches and bodies we do not need, but we have taken them in anyway, and in many ways are still controlled by or are at least struggling with those. So I think that one avenue, we haven't talked about dealing with fear yet, we'll get to that in the series, but one avenue for dealing with that kind of fear is recognizing this isn't mine. And I'm just going to, again, take blacks as an example, because when I grew up, blacks still couldn't use white bathrooms, white restaurants, and so on. There was segregation. And in certain circles, not mine personally, but in certain circles, there was a fear of blacks, and blacks were the bad guys and dangerous and criminals and all that. And so you should be afraid of them. If you see a black guy walking down your street, you should be afraid. If you see him walking down your street at night, you should be really afraid. So we have a lot of socially implanted fears of one another and of various groups that aren't real, in the sense that they haven't organically arisen in our own experience. And if we recognize that, we can begin to see our culture, for lack of a better word, programming us toward those ends, and just go, oh, well, here it is. This is where they're trying to get me afraid of this. Okay, I get what's going on. I don't need to be afraid of that. This isn't real. This is something somebody's putting on. This isn't mine. They might be afraid of that. Doesn't mean I need to be. This isn't mine, so I can let go of it. For me, that's a helpful thing. But anyway, I'll pause there a moment again in case anybody else has something you'd like to share with the group, and then we'll get on to one other part maybe tonight. Anybody have anything you'd like to share? All right, then. So the next piece I want to kind of, and we can go back and forth. If you think of something that relates to something we did earlier, you can jump back or forward anytime. The other part I want to spend some time with is what happens when we're afraid. What is the physiology of fear? And part of that is, how do you feel when you are afraid? And there are degrees, obviously. You can be a little bit concerned about something. You can kind of chronically worry about something, or you can be really afraid, like panic, terror afraid. And they're all different degrees. But when you have a serious fear, how do you feel when you're in that state? And then physiologically, just to point out, and Anna may have a lot more, or others of you as well, but basic physiology, to the degree I know it, is that when a strong emotion of fear is present, it sends lots of blood and oxygen to a section of the brain called the amygdala. And it's an old part of the reptilian brain, and it controls old responses. The initial protect the biology of this body mechanism is usually described as the fight or flight mechanism. That's an inaccurate description, because it's actually three components. It's freeze, flight, or fight. The first thing that happens is you freeze up. The second thing that happens is you decide to fight or to flee. Or if you decide to flee and can't, then you fight, or then you freeze up again. But it's those three elements. Because as James was pointing out with the saber-toothed tigers, those three elements have saved us in our human evolution. If we're moving, and many predators back then, and some still, are visual predators. If you aren't moving, they don't see you. So freezing can save you in certain situations. That's why mice and rabbits, for example, will freeze if cats are after them, because the cat doesn't see them if they're not moving. Versus dogs, who will smell them whether they're moving or not. So freezing can save your life, running can save your life, fighting can save your life. So those are some biological built-in mechanisms, but the amygdala takes over that part. And one of the things that happens is the blood flow to the cerebral cortex portion, where you evaluate and make decisions, is rapidly shut down. And the amygdala responses literally take over. You have to make an effort to activate that frontal area where you can make conscious choices as opposed to reactive fear choices. It's just biological. It's not even psychological at that point or spiritual. It's biology. Um, then, once that's triggered and the body's now in a hyper alert, condition red state, then several other things happen. Number one, the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys start pumping a ton of adrenaline into your system, so that it increases your speed and strength, both of which can be an asset in saving your life. What can also make you sick later when you're not in that situation. The cortisol levels in your bloodstream go up very high. Many things happen in the brain, and also the fine motor skills begin to diminish radically because the blood flow concentrates in the center of the body in the brain and not on any of the extremities. So there's a lot that happens when your body's in a state of fear that was designed biologically to protect the body from the kinds of things that used to threaten it. One of the problems that we have as a culture and individually now with fear is that we are in a psychological state of fear, not a real one, but the brain and biochemical reactions are no different. If somebody were really, God forbid, with you and about to shoot you and kill you, or about to, do something horrible to you, and that was really happening, your body had this kind of reactions that I'm talking about. But if you are imagining that at any minute that could happen to you when you're walking across the parking lot in the dark, or when you're sitting in your home, or when you're somewhere in a public crowd, when you think, oh my God, I'm in danger, my life's in danger, my life's in danger, any minute something horrible like this could happen, even though it's not happening, your body doesn't know that. If that's what you're thinking, that is the way your physiology will react. So we are in a hyper vigilant, fearful state more often than not as a culture now. And that produces terrible effects on the physical body. And if it's sustained long enough, it produces serious organ and system malfunction in the body, which lead to serious illness. So that state of constant stress is another way of saying a state of constant fear. And the biological mechanism of fear is designed to help us and to protect us. But when we're in a constant psychological state of imaginary fear that the body can't distinguish as being unreal, then we're constantly in this state. And that constant chemical mix in the body and stress in the muscles and all the other things, it causes real damage to the body, which then in turn causes psychological issues, because it's all related. All the mechanisms are related. They're interconnected. So that's another problem is, and I don't know statistically, I haven't studied this, but just from having children and grandchildren and now great grandchildren and seeing several generations, I don't know the percent. Maybe Anna would, maybe somebody else would. I keep saying Anna because for those of you who don't know, she's a medical doctor, among other things. The percent of our youth that are on full-time anxiety drugs now is staggeringly high. Even though some of those drugs existed when I was young, and many more existed when my kids were growing up, we knew next to no one on any of those. And now I think most of the kids that my grandkids and great grandkids know are on those things. So because the anxiety level is so high for people right now. And again, not based on real life experience for the most part. For the most part, because of what we're being told and exposed to through various social and cultural environments that we participate in. So again, stopping there. Anybody have anything you'd like to share before we move toward wrapping up tonight? Yeah, Nahama or Shirley.
Both of us.
Yay! All right, 2 for 1.
Yeah.
You go first, Mommy.
You want me to go first?
Mm.
Okay. my own experience, I am extremely sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll pick up on something and it doesn't feel comfortable in my body. And I used to react to that.
Mm-hmm.
I would watch those kinds of things happen and I had to release the chemicals and stuff. I'd,
Mm-hmm.
just breathe through it till I was alone and could express whatever emotions that were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned is that I can retrain my brain to not react in that way. And I think that's a really important thing we need to know is that we can retrain our brains.
Boy, me too. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
We've conditioned ourselves and culture has conditioned us. That's the bad news. The good news is because that was possible, it's possible to retrain ourselves.
We just have to go into it with awareness.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And make the effort. Like you just said, you have to make the effort to, even once you're aware of it, you need to make the effort to reprogram or repattern.
Yeah. Yeah. And now I'll let her talk.
Okay.
Okay. I have three things, but one is a comment to James. James, I absolutely love your shirt because I know it's and I hope you saw the play as well as the movie. Spam
You
on.
did.
Good. Both movie and play are great. Okay. And very appropriate for tonight. And okay, so the other two things, one of them, I don't know if it works, but when I was in community college, my ancient of a daddy had a grand mal seizure. So it was about 1920,
Mhm.
21, give or take, because it was in the summer. And
Bless you.
there, when it happened,
Oh,
We were at the hospital because we
Right.
saw it happen. It was this very long process.
mhm.
and the interesting thing is, every time it's brought up, I literally shudder. But the interesting thing is, I have, from the moment he starts moaning and after the convulsions, I have, in between that, I have a total blank. I don't
Right.
remember. Mom
Right.
says, get a high pitched scream. I have no memory.
Loudest scream I've ever heard.
I have no memory of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, as you know, I had, when I was 19 months old, I had the heart surgery, the PDA,
Mhm.
patent ductus
Arteriosus.
arteriosus. And after the surgery, me 19 months old, 16 pounds,
Strapped to
an adult bed in the ICU
on morphine.
In Gainesville, Florida at Shands. And that night there was, after the surgery, being high on morphine, there was a humongous storm, tons of storms apparently, like funnel clouds and stuff. So there must have been a ton of sirens going on. The only thing we can manage, because now, as you know, I do not like thunderstorms or any sirens.
Or sirens, yeah.
And the worst are fire alarms.
Mhm.
For me, I get panic attacks.
Mhm.
I get that literal, because I was trained as a, little kid, as a preschooler, what to do when a fire alarm happens.
Mhm.
You get your stuff and you go. But for me, after the adrenaline, after, the fight and freeze, I literally start crying uncontrollably for no apparent reason.
Mhm.
And that's the panic attack. And that probably is a result from when I was 19 months old and hearing all those sirens.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we can sort of figure out. And I still get that reaction for fire alarms, but I've learned to sort of hold off, or sometimes it is more
You
hard
breathe
to
through them. Very difficult, but you breathe through 'em.
It may take a bit longer for the waterworks to appear, but they still appear sometimes. Some of them are a matter of, moments.
Mhm.
With regular thunderstorms, if it's so far out, then I don't really bat an eye. I'm like, oh, I think that's thunder. But the closer it gets,
Yeah.
you can get I'll
Yeah.
be latching as close as I can.
And my
Oh, yeah.
hand turned blue.
Yeah.
I'll be on
Yeah.
in a vice grip. And when it's regular sirens, fire alarms, or, I mean, ambulance or police siren or whatever, one of those alarms, I'm going, okay, where is the alarm coming from? I need to know so I
Mhm.
can be out of the way.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do plug in ear and sometimes I don't, but I don't get as much of a,
It's not as
it's
intense,
not
but there's
as
still pain.
Right, right,
but I've learned to lessen, to
right.
Yeah.
do a bit more calm, try and do deep breathing and stuff.
And I just want to point out, do you hear that? You can hear it in her voice right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. Just even talking. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
No,
Thank you for sharing that, Shirley. I appreciate it.
and
You
I'm
know
now
that-
34, so go figure. I
Yeah.
still become a scaredy cat.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you're traumatized, boy, it's in there. It's in the body. So I'm going to go to Anna here and then we'll wrap up for tonight. So we won't take anybody after Anna tonight, but thank you all for being here. Anna, go ahead.
Oh, I want to be respectful of your time. I can do this next time. I just have a couple of little things I wanted to add, but
Mm.
wait,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
time.
okay. Do you if you can add it in a minute or two, let's do it. If you need like 5 or 10 minutes, let's wait till
Uh,
next week.
I won't take, I will, Shirley's describing PTSD.
Yeah.
And when there's early trauma, the amygdala actually enlarges.
Mm-hmm.
Hippocampus gets smaller, which is an adaptive thing because then you will respond to a lower level of stress than quotes normal people would or people that have not been
Mm-hmm.
traumatized that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the hippocampus is for memory. So then you may not remember as much because it's too traumatic for you to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So then there is a set physical brain change, which
Yeah.
led me, I'm very interested in getting to, well, how do you deal with fear? Because there are certain people that have been primed physiologically to be triggered and have more fear and panic than others have. And
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I have no explanation of that. So that's one thing. The other, also in PTSD theory, is that people usually prefer one or one. They either freeze, they either fight, or they flee. And that leads to certain, I guess, if you want to call behaviors that will trigger them. So they will have something predominant that they will react with.
Yes.
Other people won't.
Yeah.
So that's all. I just wanted to kind of fine tune that. And if you're highly sensitive, like Nechama, and you've been traumatized,
Yeah.
then it's a kind of a double whammy to
Yeah.
deal with.
No kidding.
Oh,
No kidding.
so that fits in there too with how individuals have to deal with fear based on just the biology
Mm-hmm.
that has happened to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 That's very insightful. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that. Yeah, and feel free again next week to, at any point, besides your personal comments, anything medically that you think would be useful, for to share with people like that is great. Thanks so much. All righty, so we're out of time this week. That went by really fast for me. I was just talking to someone today about, I don't know if there's a time warp or what, but things have been speeding by for me lately. So my grandpa always said it happened when you got older, and I'm willing to admit that, and I've definitely gotten older, but but I hear that from people decades younger than me too. I think something actually is speeding up right now beyond, me being old or those of you who are my age being old. Um, we seem to be moving more quickly than we were. So that's another topic for another time. So let's just take a moment of quiet again as we started. And just sit with all these things that have come forward and all the things that have come forward in your awareness that you might not have shared if you're not one of those who spoke tonight. And just let all of those begin to come quiet in you for a moment. We're not going into a period of meditation or anything, just taking a moment to come back into quiet inside. So that anything that would be helpful to us that came forward tonight through the group or within you, you will remember and be able to use. And anything that's unsettling or unhelpful tonight that you can't use, just kind of gently let that slip away so that it doesn't add to things you're carrying. So may this be a week of unexpected blessings for you, of good health, of good news, and of good connections within yourself and among those you care about. Thank you for being part of our life and being part of this community. We appreciate it. God bless. Good night, y'all.